The year was 1963. Across America, the optimistic sheen of the post-war era still clung to the national consciousness, yet beneath it, currents of profound social change and darker, unacknowledged realities were beginning to stir. It was a time of burgeoning television culture, of glossy magazines promising idealized lives, and of a particular kind of American dream that often placed feminine beauty on a fragile, brightly lit pedestal. Our story begins not in the bustling metropolises where such dreams were manufactured, but in the quieter, more traditional landscape of the American South. In a small town in Georgia, amidst the scent of magnolia blossoms and the gentle cadence of southern drawls, a young woman named Evelyn Whittaker was coming of age. Evelyn possessed a striking, almost ethereal beauty, a combination of classic features, intelligent, expressive eyes, and a grace that seemed to set her apart, even in a region known for its belles. But Evelyn's aspirations stretched beyond the confines of local admiration. She harbored a quiet ambition, a desire for a life less ordinary, though the exact shape of that life remained undefined in her youthful imaginings. The catalyst for change arrived in the form of the annual Miss Magnolia State beauty pageant, a venerable institution that, for many young women of the era, represented one of the few visible pathways to a world beyond their immediate horizons. Persuaded by family and local well-wishers, Evelyn entered, navigating the rounds of interviews, talent showcases, her talent being a surprisingly adept recitation of Southern poetry, and the inevitable swimsuit parade, all under the watchful, often critical, eyes of judges and a hopeful local audience. The culmination of the pageant, as it often was, became a local media event. Grainy black and white newsreel footage from that humid summer evening would later show Evelyn, radiant under the stage lights, a look of polite surprise on her face as her name was announced. Flashbulbs popped with an almost blinding intensity, a cacophony of momentary suns freezing her image for posterity. Cheering men, local dignitaries in slightly rumpled suits, moved forward to bestow upon her a glittering, perhaps slightly oversized, crown and a sash bearing her new title. To the cameras, to the local newspaper reporters scribbling furiously, to the proud faces in the audience, she was, in that moment, the embodiment of an American dream, a small-town girl crowned queen, her future seemingly paved with promise and opportunity. But as the narrator of that old newsreel might have intoned, with a touch of knowing foreshadowing, to the cameras she was America's dream. But off stage, her dream was about to become a trap. The victory, while celebrated, soon brought with it a subtle shift in Evelyn's reality. The local adulation was one thing, but the title of Miss Magnolia State carried with it a certain weight, a set of expectations, and most significantly, an entry into a system. Within weeks, the invitations began to arrive. Not for university scholarships, which she had quietly hoped for, nor for apprenticeships in fields that might engage her keen mind, but for appearances, endorsements, and eventually, an invitation that felt both thrilling and vaguely disquieting. A summons to New York City. The prestigious perfume brand, Elan, was seeking a new face for their national advertising campaign, a face that embodied Southern charm and classic American beauty. Evelyn Whittaker, Miss Magnolia 1963, was invited to audition. The journey to New York was a stark transition. The languid pace and familiar comforts of her southern hometown were replaced by the relentless energy, the towering architecture, and the anonymous throngs of the metropolis. Evelyn felt a profound internal conflict. Part of her was undeniably excited by the prospect, by the sheer scale of opportunity that New York seemed to represent. Yet another, more introspective part of her felt a growing unease. She had always aspired to be more than just a pretty face, to be recognized for her intelligence, her thoughts, her character. But the world, it seemed, was primarily interested in her appearance. The Elan audition was a significant opportunity, the kind that could launch a national career, but it was also an opportunity predicated entirely on the aesthetic qualities she possessed, qualities she had neither earned nor, in many ways, fully understood the implications of. The conflict was not just about career. It was about identity, about the nagging fear that her beauty might become a gilded cage, limiting her rather than liberating her. The Elan offices were an opulent testament to the burgeoning power of the advertising industry. Marble floors, abstract art, and impeccably dressed executives exuded an aura of sophisticated control. The audition itself was a blur of bright lights, probing camera lenses, and polite but ultimately impersonal assessments. Evelyn performed as requested, smiling, turning, holding the perfume bottle just so, feeling less like an individual and more like a carefully arranged still life. The real education, however, began at the modeling house where she was temporarily lodged, a grand but slightly faded brownstone that served as a communal living space and a sort of finishing school for aspiring models from across the country. Here, amidst the shared bathrooms and the lingering scent of hairspray and ambition, Evelyn encountered a diverse cast of other young women, each with her own story, her own hopes, and often, her own collection of carefully concealed anxieties. There was Layla, a willowy redhead from the Midwest, whose early success had led to a string of promising endorsements, but who now spoke with a quiet bitterness about photographers who demanded more than just poses and contracts that seemed designed to entrap rather than empower. There was Maria, a dark-haired beauty from California, whose face had graced several magazine covers a year prior, but who now found herself struggling for callbacks, the relentless churn of the industry already deeming her last season's look. And then there were the whispers, hushed conversations in dimly lit corners about girls who had simply vanished. Girls who had been on the cusp of stardom, their faces seemingly everywhere, and then, without explanation, had disappeared from the scene, their apartments emptied, their calls unreturned, their careers inexplicably snuffed out. These stories were often dismissed as industry gossip, cautionary tales exaggerated by jealousy or failure, but they lingered in the air, a subtle undercurrent of unease beneath the glamorous facade. Strange things began to happen to Evelyn herself, small incidents that, taken individually, might have seemed innocuous, but collectively began to paint a disquieting pattern. She started to notice a man, nondescript in a dark suit and hat, who seemed to appear in her periphery more often than coincidence would allow on the subway platform, across the street from the modeling house, in the background of a candid photograph a fellow model had taken. Then a series of photographs from a test shoot she had done for a department store catalog were inexplicably pulled, with no explanation offered by the agency. Just a curt note saying her look wasn't quite right for the brand at this time. Most unsettling were the hushed whispers she began to overhear, fragments of conversations between older, more established figures in the industry, references to a collector's club, a gallery of beauties, a secretive, elite group of wealthy and powerful men who, it was rumored, didn't just admire beautiful women, but sought to collect them. To possess them as one might possess a rare piece of art, their value measured not in talent or intellect, but in their fleeting, marketable perfection. Evelyn tried to dismiss these as paranoid fantasies, the product of an overactive imagination in a new and intimidating environment. But a seed of fear had been planted, a creeping suspicion that the world she had stepped into was far more complex and potentially far more dangerous than the glossy advertisements and beauty pageant smiles ever let on. The illusion of glamour was beginning to show its cracks. The unsettling incidents escalated, solidifying Evelyn's growing sense of dread. One morning, she awoke with a start, a primal instinct screaming that something was amiss. The air in her small room at the modeling house felt different, disturbed. Her heart pounded as she scanned the familiar space. Nothing immediately seemed out of place, yet the feeling of violation was palpable. Then she saw it. Her carefully arranged portfolio of photographs, usually tucked away in a large envelope, was splayed open on her vanity table. The photos themselves were undisturbed, but their deliberate rearrangement was a clear, silent message. Her eyes darted to the mirror above the vanity. Scrawled across its surface in lurid, crimson lipstick were 3 chilling words: "You're next, Belle." The term Belle, a diminutive often used for southern beauties, felt both cloyingly familiar and deeply menacing in this context. Nothing else in the room had been stolen or even touched. The intrusion was not for material gain. It was a psychological assault, a declaration that she was being watched, known, and targeted. The police, when called, were polite but dismissive, attributing it to a prank by a jealous rival or an overzealous admirer. But Evelyn knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was something far more sinister. In the midst of this rising anxiety, a figure emerged who seemed to offer both salvation and a new kind of suffocation: Mr. Alastair Langston. Langston was a prominent talent agent, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and trepidation in the modeling and entertainment circles. He was impeccably dressed, his manners polished to a high sheen, his connections seemingly limitless. He approached Evelyn after a minor charity fashion show, expressing profound admiration for her unique and timeless beauty, and offered to take her under his wing to guide her career, to protect her from the less savory elements of the industry. Evelyn, feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable, was initially swayed by his confident demeanor and his promises of carefully curated opportunities. Langston seemed to understand her desire to be more than just a face. He spoke of a new campaign for a luxury brand that would emphasize elegance and intelligence, not just allure. Yet, as their professional relationship developed, Evelyn began to feel a subtle but pervasive sense of control. Langston was attentive, almost obsessively so. He advised her on her wardrobe, her acquaintances, even her reading material. He arranged for a new, more secure apartment, ostensibly for her safety, but one where he seemed to possess an unnerving familiarity with her schedule. His protection felt increasingly like possession, his guidance like a silken leash. Driven by the lipstick message and her growing unease about Langston, Evelyn began to discreetly investigate the stories of the disappeared models. She found herself drawn to the case of Clara Monroe, a stunningly beautiful model who had been the face of Elan perfume just 2 years prior, in 1961, before vanishing without a trace. Clara's career had been meteoric, her image ubiquitous, and then silence. Official reports suggested she had simply tired of the industry and moved abroad, but the whispers in the modeling house told a different, darker story. Through a sympathetic, albeit fearful, older model who had briefly known Clara, Evelyn managed to obtain a small, leather-bound diary that had belonged to the missing woman, found tucked away and forgotten in a storage locker. As Evelyn read Clara Monroe's diary, a profound sense of horror washed over her. The entries, penned in a graceful, looping script, detailed a sequence of events, a pattern of experiences that mirrored her own with an almost terrifying precision. Clara wrote of the initial excitement of New York, the thrill of her first major campaign, then the subtle, creeping feeling of being watched, the unexplained professional setbacks, the interest of a powerful, older male figure who offered guidance but demanded an unspoken fealty. Clara even described receiving anonymous, unsettling notes, one of which mentioned being marked, not chosen. The parallels were undeniable, word for word in some passages. It was as if Evelyn was reading a script for her own life, a script that seemed to be leading inexorably towards the same vanishing point as Clara Monroe. The diary was not just a record of a past tragedy. It felt like a direct, chilling warning from beyond the silence. Despite Langston's attempts to manage her career carefully, or perhaps because of them, Evelyn's image began to achieve national prominence. The Elan perfume campaign launched, and her face, artfully lit and exuding an air of sophisticated mystery, appeared in glossy magazines across the country. Then came the ultimate symbol of visibility in that era, a massive billboard in Times Square. Seeing her own likeness, towering many stories above the bustling New York crowds, was a dizzying, surreal experience. It was a moment of triumph, yet it was tinged with a profound sense of exposure, of being offered up for public consumption. The same night her billboard was unveiled, the vague threats materialized into a terrifyingly real encounter. As Evelyn waited on a crowded subway platform after a late dinner, Langston had uncharacteristically allowed her an evening out with a few other models. She felt a sudden, violent shove from behind. She stumbled, her balance lost, towards the edge of the platform just as the roar of an approaching train filled the tunnel. Only a desperate grab from a fellow commuter saved her from falling onto the tracks. Shaken and disoriented, she caught a fleeting glimpse of her assailant. A man in a dark trench coat and fedora, his face obscured by shadow, melting back into the crowd. But not before he leaned in, his voice a low, chilling hiss in her ear. "They won't let you leave." The anonymity of the subway, once a symbol of urban freedom, now felt like a hunting ground. The message was clear. Her beauty, now amplified to a national scale, had made her not just visible, but a prisoner of that visibility. One of the few people Evelyn felt she could confide in was Joni, a spirited, street-smart model from Brooklyn who had also been at the modeling house. Joni was less naive than many of the other girls, possessing a cynical understanding of the industry's darker currents. When Evelyn, pale and trembling, recounted the subway incident, Joni listened with a grim expression. She didn't dismiss Evelyn's fears. Instead, she seemed to recognize the pattern. Joni had heard similar stories, third-hand accounts of models who had gotten too big or tried to break away and had faced intimidation or worse. She believed Evelyn was in genuine danger and offered to help her find a way out, perhaps to contact a journalist she knew who was rumored to be investigating a story about exploitation in the fashion world. For a few days, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope, a sense of shared purpose with Joni. They made discreet plans, spoke in hushed tones. Then, just as suddenly as Clara Monroe had, Joni vanished. Her room at the modeling house was cleared out overnight. The agency claimed she had taken an unexpected assignment in Europe, but Evelyn knew better. Joni, by trying to help, had crossed a line, and the unseen forces that seemed to be manipulating their lives had made her disappear. The price of visibility was becoming terrifyingly clear, and the trap was closing in. The disappearance of Joni was a stark, brutal turning point for Evelyn. The vague anxieties and unsettling incidents had now solidified into a palpable, ever-present threat. Mr. Langston's reassurances, once a source of comfort, now felt hollow, even complicit. Evelyn realized she could trust no one within the established structures of the industry. Armed with Clara Monroe's diary and her own terrifying experiences, she began a desperate, clandestine search for answers, for a way out of the tightening net. Her investigations led her back to the opulent building that housed Langston's talent agency, a place that increasingly felt less like an office and more like the headquarters of some shadowy organization. Driven by a combination of fear and a desperate need for truth, Evelyn managed, through a carefully planned subterfuge involving a faked after-hours appointment, to gain access to parts of the agency building she had never seen before. She discovered a private elevator, unmarked on the public directories, which led to a hidden floor. The opulence of the main offices gave way here to something far more unsettling. The corridors were dimly lit, the air heavy and still. She found a series of rooms, each one meticulously decorated, not as an office, but as a stage set. One room was an exact replica of a glamorous 1950s Parisian boudoir, complete with a canopied bed and antique vanity. Another was a mock-up of a rustic ski lodge, complete with a fake fireplace and mounted animal heads. A third was a futuristic, almost sterile white chamber. Each room felt eerily familiar, and then Evelyn realized with a sickening lurch. They were identical to the backdrops of famous photo shoots. Iconic advertisements featuring models who had, in subsequent years, faded from public view or disappeared altogether. It was as if these rooms were living dioramas, places where fantasies were not just photographed, but perhaps lived out, or where women were kept. The most chilling discovery on this hidden floor was a small, unmarked security room. Inside, a bank of monitors flickered with live feeds from hidden cameras. Evelyn watched in horror as she saw images of her own apartment, the secure one Langston had arranged for her. Cameras were concealed in the light fixtures, behind mirrors, capturing her every move, her private moments. She saw footage of the common areas in the modeling house, of the agency's own reception area. The surveillance was total, pervasive. She was not just being managed, she was being constantly, secretly watched. The realization that her life was a performance for an unseen audience, that her privacy was an illusion, was a profound violation. Her desperate search for understanding eventually led her to a disgruntled former employee of the agency, a low-level accountant who had been fired for asking too many questions. He met Evelyn in a clandestine, out-of-the-way diner, his eyes constantly darting around, his voice a low, fearful whisper. He confirmed her worst fears. Langston's agency, he explained, was indeed a front, a sophisticated recruitment arm for a secretive, immensely powerful group of men, industrialists, politicians, media moguls, who shared a peculiar, obsessive interest. They didn't just admire beauty, they sought to possess it, to control it, to treat beautiful women as rare, exquisite commodities, trophies to be acquired and displayed within their exclusive circle. The models weren't just employees. They were prospects, their careers carefully managed, their lives subtly manipulated until they were deemed ready for acquisition, or until they became too independent, too troublesome, at which point they were silenced or made to disappear. "The prettier you are, the more unique your look," the accountant whispered, his hands trembling as he clutched his coffee cup. "The shorter your freedom lasts." They see it as an investment, and they protect their investments. The true nature of the beauty trap was now horrifyingly clear. It was not just about the pressures of an industry. It was about a calculated, predatory system designed to ensnare and control. Evelyn knew she had to escape, not just for herself, but to somehow expose this monstrous enterprise. The opportunity, or so it seemed, presented itself in the form of a lavish black-tie gala hosted by one of the prominent industrialists rumored to be a key member of the Collectors Club. Langston insisted Evelyn attend. It was, he said, a crucial networking event. Evelyn saw it as her only chance. The gala was a sea of glittering diamonds, champagne, and powerful, predatory smiles. Evelyn, dressed in a stunning gown, felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. She knew she was being watched, assessed. During a moment of orchestrated distraction, a staged argument between two minor celebrities that drew the attention of the security detail, Evelyn made her move. She slipped away from Langston's side, into the labyrinthine service corridors of the Grand Hotel. Shedding her gown and jewels in a dark alcove, she donned a simple maid's uniform she had managed to acquire earlier, her hair hastily tucked under a cap. Disguised, anonymous, she navigated her way through the bustling kitchens and out a service exit, into the relative anonymity of the New York night, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a fragile, nascent hope. Her escape from the gala was only the first step. Evelyn knew that the organization, with its vast resources and influence, would be searching for her. She decided her only recourse was to go public, to expose the Collectors Club and its dark machinations to the world. She meticulously compiled her evidence: Clara Monroe's diary, her own notes on the surveillance, the accountant's whispered testimony. She approached several prominent newspapers and radio stations, hoping to find a journalist brave enough to take on such a powerful, shadowy group. The response was chillingly uniform. Editors listened politely, some with feigned interest, others with barely concealed fear. They made vague promises to look into it, but no calls were ever returned. One sympathetic, older editor, a man who looked as though he had seen too much of the world's ugliness, took her aside after one such fruitless meeting. He spoke in a low, regretful tone. "Darling, it's a good story. A terrifying story, but some stories are too dangerous to print." He paused, then added, his voice barely a whisper, "They own more than cameras, you see. They own the mirrors, too." His words confirmed the vast, almost insurmountable, reach of the organization. They didn't just control images. They controlled the narratives, the media, the very reflections of reality that the public consumed. The facade of a free press, Evelyn realized, could be just as illusory as the facade of glamour she had once been a part of. The system was designed to protect itself, and she was an inconvenient, expendable truth. The realization that the conventional avenues of justice and exposure were closed to her was a devastating blow. Evelyn understood that as long as she remained Evelyn Whittaker, Miss Magnolia State, the face from the Elan billboards, she would never be truly safe. The organization would hunt her, silence her, or worse. Her beauty, once a source of opportunity, had become an undeniable liability, a beacon for those who wished to control and possess. She had to disappear, not just from the industry, but from her very identity. The plan she conceived was desperate, extreme, but it felt like her only option. With the last of her savings and the discreet, fearful help of the accountant who had first warned her, and who himself was planning to vanish, Evelyn staged her own death. The scene was a remote, winding mountain road in upstate New York, a rented car, a faked mechanical failure leading to a fiery crash into a ravine. Evidence was carefully planted items of her clothing, a few personal effects, to suggest a tragic, accidental end for the once celebrated beauty queen. The news reports were brief, a fleeting mention of a promising life cut short, quickly overshadowed by the next day's headlines. For the world, Evelyn Whittaker ceased to exist. Under a new name, with her appearance subtly altered, her distinctive blonde hair dyed a mousy brown, her posture changed. Her southern accent carefully suppressed, she made her way north, eventually settling in the quiet, unassuming state of Vermont. She found work in a small library, the anonymity a welcome balm after the relentless scrutiny she had endured. The vibrant, dangerous world of New York high society and celebrity culture felt like a distant, fevered dream. Here, surrounded by books and the quiet rhythms of small-town life, she began to slowly, painstakingly, rebuild a life based not on her reflection in a mirror, but on the quiet strength of her own intellect and resilience. 10 years passed, the world changed. The turbulent 60s gave way to the 70s, with its own set of cultural shifts and social upheavals. Evelyn, now living a life of deliberate obscurity, never forgot what she had experienced. The faces of Clara Monroe, of Joni, of the other unnamed women who had been caught in the beauty trap, haunted her quiet moments. She felt a profound obligation to their memory, a need to ensure their stories were not entirely erased. She began to write. Anonymously, using a pseudonym, she penned a memoir, a tell-all account of her experiences in the underbelly of the beauty and celebrity machine, detailing the surveillance, the manipulation, the collectors' club, and the pervasive sense of dread that had consumed her life. She changed names, locations, and certain identifying details to protect herself and the few who had tried to help her. But the core truth of her story, the chilling exposé of a system that treated women as disposable commodities shone through. The book, when finally published by a small, independent press, did not become an immediate bestseller. It was too dark, too unsettling for mainstream consumption, but it found its audience. It became a cult classic, passed from hand to hand, discussed in hushed tones in feminist circles, and among those disillusioned with the manufactured perfection of popular culture. Whispers of the beauty club, of the powerful men who collected women, began to circulate more widely, a persistent urban legend rooted in a terrifying, unproven reality. No one, of course, was ever arrested. The organization, if it truly existed as Evelyn described, remained in the shadows, its influence too pervasive, its members too well protected. The final scene of our story, or perhaps the final echo of Evelyn's, takes place many years later, in the hushed, climate-controlled archive of a private art gallery in a major city, a gallery known for its discreet, high-value acquisitions. An old, impeccably dressed man, his face a mask of refined connoisseurship, opens a locked, unmarked drawer in a heavy mahogany cabinet. Inside, nestled on black velvet, are rows of black and white glossy headshots of beautiful young women from decades past. Each photograph is pristine, preserved with an almost reverential care. The old man selects one, the face of a young Evelyn Whittaker, radiant in her Miss Magnolia state crown. He studies it for a long moment, a faint, unreadable smile playing on his lips. Beneath the photograph, a small, typewritten label reads, Evelyn W. 1963, status still missing.